That is an instinct. That is an instinct that teachers have, just to be able to know what's going on there. I like to call it a dance. You are literally, if you are a master teacher, you are dancing in your classroom with your students, with your curriculum, and it's all just beautiful together.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
I think Mitchell had a very good... Do that again.
What was the word I said? How'd I start?
Welcome to Classical Etc.
Welcome to Classical Etc. My name is Mitchell, and I'm joined by our illustrious co-hosts.
Stop. Welcome to Classical Etc. I'm Tanya. This is Martin. This is Paul. And this is Mitchell, standing in for Jessica. So it's going to be fun today because I'm going to wrangle these three men and make them behave.
Good luck.
Hopefully.
Actually, he's not standing in for Jessica. He's sitting in.
Sitting.
Okay. He's not even sitting in for Jessica because you're doing the hosting.
That's
he's
right.
Sitting in for you.
I don't believe I'm doing the hosting because he can't keep his mouth shut. And we got a complaint that we were cutting Mitchell off and not letting him talk.
Listen, I couldn't agree more. I don't know who said that. I don't know who said that, but
so you just cut Tanya off.
You sure did. But here's the thing: is if we don't cut Mitchell off, nobody else gets to talk, and it basically becomes a soliloquy.
Maybe that's best, though. It's what the people want. It's what the people want.
This is already going downhill. We really need Jessica because she keeps us sane.
Well, she normally starts with books.
Yes. Oh, okay. Mitchell, what are you reading?
Well, you can't start with me.
Why?
Well, I guess you're the boss. I'm reading much of what I was reading last time because I haven't had much time to finish what I've been reading. Still working through our beautiful set of novels by John le Carré, the ones that you don't like, but they're really good, and the rest of us should like them, and you, the listener, should read them as well as the French cookbook. It's Escoffier.
Oh, right. Well,
I'll be in there for a while because
it's going to take you a while.
Yeah, because I have to I've been having to put it down and actually practice some of the skills. Otherwise, I'm accumulating too many skills that I don't yet have mastered.
Okay. Well, that was boring. What are you reading, Paul?
You're not going to like mine much more. I'm still in Daphne du Maurier's The King's General.
Oh, is it? Do you like it? Is it gothic? I mean, does it feel like Rebecca?
It feels like Rebecca, yes.
Oh.
Yes. But it's intriguing, the main character, a woman who's got a love interest at the beginning, and then she becomes paraplegic, and then he goes off and does other things, but she's still following his life.
Okay.
Intrigue.
Okay, so it's a love story.
As they all are.
Or there's love tragedy.
Some form of that.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Okay. Well, I mean, we're all reading the same things. Are you reading the same thing?
I am reading a book again. I'm rereading a book.
When I do that, I feel guilty because I think there's so much I haven't read.
I do too. But I've reached the point in my life when, I'm looking at I have probably a stack of notebooks that I've just jotted notes, thoughts down in. That's about this high, and I'm thinking, and I started to go through them thinking, oh, well, that's relevant now, and. So what was the purpose of filling up all those notebooks full of stuff if I'm not going to use them or revisit them at some point or whatever? And so now also with books, I'm going back and looking at books that I really enjoyed. And it's been enough time to where I sort of forgot what was in them anyway. So it's like reading them new.
It is true.
And so you're reading The Three Musketeers?
No, I will not be reading that one. We already talked about that. But actually, the book I actually do have a purpose for reading it. Which we won't talk about quite yet, but I'm now reading again How to Think Like Shakespeare by Scott Newstock. And it was relevant actually also to today's discussion. Ironically, I wasn't reading it for that purpose, and I'm finding this just so thought provoking in every way about a lot of things. I mean, the title, I guess, is It's a great title, How to Think Like Shakespeare.
Right, but you should do the subtitle because that
Renaissance lessons from a Renaissance education.
Right.
Yeah, that's really
it's really about education.
Yeah, it's just about education, and it's a great little sort of contrast to the topic for today.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tanya, what are you reading?
I'm like 40 pages from finishing Barnaby Rudge.
Yeah.
So
Has
I'm
it
very
gotten good?
excited. It is good. It's not that it's not good. It's just that it meanders along too much. I feel like it would be better if it were 500 pages instead of 700. But it is still. I'm still enjoying it. I mean, I wouldn't have finished a 700-page book if I weren't enjoying it. But I'm so close to finishing. Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow morning. So. Today's topic is one that we've been talking about for a while and wanting to do a podcast on, but we just have kept putting it off. I think because it's rather complicated. But we get the question all the time about how Charlotte Mason and classical education are the same, how they differ. Can you say Charlotte Mason education is classical? And so our CSRs have to talk about that quite a bit, and we felt like maybe it would be something good for us to talk about. And
maybe.
So we're going to try it. If it doesn't work, then this episode will never see the light of day. So we've got Charlotte Mason's 20 Principles.
It comes from the preface of volume 6.
Of her books.
Which I guess is sort of like cumulative, like this is what I think education is.
Yes.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
And so Mitchell has boiled this down to 4 points for us.
Well, I should say that.
And we're going to use his, I had all kinds of notes, but I'm going with your.
Well, I think your notes might be really good. So I had 4, having read the 20 principles, I thought that there were sort of 4 disagreements. Or sort of 4 questions.
On this document, is this available to, if our viewers want to see it?
If they just Google Charlotte Mason's 20 Principles,
okay,
it's going to come right up.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. And I also just wanted to interrupt Mitchell again.
Yeah. That's why we stumbled into darkness for a few seconds as you were talking. Yes, right. But as I was reading these, I sort of thought of what are some of the substantive disagreements or how we might phrase things differently. And so I think I centered that around 4 questions, and maybe that'll be illuminating, maybe it won't. But
I think it will. So your first question is, what does classical education say about the nature of the child? What does Charlotte Mason say about the nature of the child? And are they different?
I think demonstrably, yes.
Demonstrably, they are different, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. That is what he's saying. He just said it with a question for some reason.
Well, the question was sort of inviting others to join in. I think I would just say, to start with this question. If the question is, what is the nature of a child? Like, what is a child? What kind of person are they? I think largely classical education would say that a child is, someone that needs to be formed, needs to be developed. They are a person. They do have aptitudes, but those aptitudes are capacities, shall we say, but those capacities have to be honed and shaped. But there's not always a lot natural to the child when you enculturate them. There's actually a lot that's resistant from children. That's the whole process. That's why I have this word enculturate. You actually have to instill something in children. So they need training, they need discipline. And I felt in reading these principles that how the child is characterized is alien to my own experience of children. Sort of this, like they have this disposition towards good things, towards always being inquisitive, to always asking the right types of questions themselves, to not needing to be asked how to train questions. There's a sort of natural sort of self-sufficiency that the child has. And they're fundamentally oriented towards good things if you'll just sort of like release them. And I'm not sure that I think a lot of people would be frustrated if they believe that about their children, then they step into trying to educate their kids and they realize, ooh, maybe it's...
Is she a romanticist?
I was feeling, as I was reading this, I would say absolutely.
Yeah.
Is romantic.
Yeah, that's a little, yeah, maybe. I could definitely see that. I mean, I don't know that it's quite as philosophical, actually, as much as it's just like, she sounds like she's the type of woman who's just sort of jumped in the classroom, and maybe she herself sort of embodied a really good teacher, and so she brought the best out of her students. But then whenever she like sort of tried to describe children more broadly and sort of the nature of children. She made some deductions about children.
I wonder if, because oftentimes for somebody who is a romanticist and doesn't realize they're a romanticist because they haven't done any reading in any of those great romantic intellectuals, they sometimes it's good for them to read some of that literature, because then they see that that's what they are.
Oh, sure.
And they realize some of the weaknesses of it. And I feel like with Charlotte Mason, that just never happened. She probably couldn't have articulated that she was a romanticist. Didn't even know it. But that's what I've always thought about Mason, is that her ideas about children are, you want to say from Emile by Rousseau, but she probably never read it.
Right.
But effectively, like, what we're saying here is that classical education has a fundamental premise that the child doesn't know what's good for them.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't think anybody would disagree with that. I mean, surely if you give them free reign, look at Farmer Boy, those sweet little Wilder children, and their parents left, and what did they do? They ate junk food the entire time they were gone.
Well, I mean, yeah, you look at Lord of the Flies. Lord of the Flies. Or you like
that's
literally
a far cry from Farmer Boy.
Yeah,
yeah, but
same principle.
Yeah, that's right.
You leave kids alone for an hour, right? I mean, this is what you see, is that they need the structures. They need the order.
Well, Chesterton said original sin is the one Christian doctrine that can be empirically proved.
Okay.
So, sorry.
I was going to move on.
Well, wait a minute now. I have some questions.
We have 3 more points.
Okay, so this issue of what a child is. I mean, there's a couple aspects of it. I mean, it's not as easy as we probably want to make this, right? Because in one sense, we're a blank slate in the sense that we need to be taught stuff. We need to be acculturated, right? But at the same time, we're human beings. So to train an animal is a very different thing from training a human being. And an animal could not be trained as a human being because it doesn't come into the world with the same faculties. We do enter the world with certain capacities, right?
Yes, yeah.
They need to be developed, but there is some permanence there in addition to the change, isn't there?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think we would all say yes.
Right. Okay. I just want to clarify that, because I mean, in terms of, to answer the question, what is a child, you kind of got to take that into account.
And I mean, I don't know, principle number 1 and what we have from Charlotte Mason says children are born persons. Absolutely. They are born persons. They demand the respect
and dignity
of the human person, right? But that doesn't mean that their free choice that we have because we have reason should be unfettered.
Right.
Well, and she does go on to say, if you look at principles 3 and 4, that the principles of authority and of obedience are natural, necessary, and fundamental, but these principles are limited by the respect due to the personality of children. And I think that's where I would say, in my classroom and in my home, obedience was not subjective based on the nature of my children. I had a certain expectation, and they needed to fall under that.
Exactly.
The nature of the child didn't affect the rules.
It's not disrespect to the child.
Absolutely
to insist
not.
on equal following of the rules.
Right. But that is typical of a progressive classroom too, that, these students over here need less structure. They will function better with less structure, and they need to be able to move. So if you've got a child in your classroom, somebody just asked me this recently, that needs movement, that needs to get up and run around the classroom, then what do you do about that?
Well, I mean, and again, I think the thing I think about in this discussion is that every human child has a final cause. They have a telos in them of what they're supposed to become. That's common to all. That's all you can address in education. You can't address individual differences in education.
Do you
You're not
think that's
focused on those
true?
things.
Do you think, are you talking about that in relation to Christianity?
I'm just saying
Or
that
just you think-
it is the Christian belief of a human being, I would
Yes.
say. But there are things about a child that are there in the child that do need to be developed towards what the purpose of a human being is.
Right, but a fundamental difference, I think, is that the classical tradition has always said that there's a world out there, and the children are actually, they're not above that world, despite their personality or whatever. They actually have to be trained to orient themselves and sort of be subjugated to what's real. Like a kid may want to be whatever sort of freedom allows them to be. But actually, like, part of educating children and is teaching them to live in line with realities. In other words, bringing them and their freedom underneath what's real and true and good and beautiful. That's what culture it does. And what she seems to be saying here is, if we continue reading, right, it says, you may not, like on the fourth point there, she was saying that you should not encroach upon the personality of the child using fear or love or suggestion or influence or any undue play upon natural desire. But maybe it's
I'm sorry, just on the face of that, I already read it, but it just struck me really funny.
It is quite funny because actually, like, maybe one way that you teach a child one of the fundamental ways you have to teach a child is that, no, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, right? And so you are not sort of free just because you're a person to go and do whatever you want or believe whatever you want, that you have to sort of step into our home, obey the rules and strictures of our house, fear the Lord, fear your parents in sort of a respect sort of a way. And it's through that process that you may actually come to know something. It's not just this, okay, don't fear anything. Like, we always love you. You're out there in the world. Like, do whatever you want and you'll learn something in that environment. It maybe the most loving thing you can do for your children is to instill the fear of the Lord in your children so that they sit at the feet of Yahweh and listen to his commandments and learn to see something.
There's a word for this. Formation.
Right, yes.
Formation. You're forming the child. You have a metaphysical model upon which you're doing it. You can't just say nature.
Right.
Just drop them in the forest.
Yes.
And, they'll grow up there and they'll be just fine. And that's what's confusing about Charlotte Mason is sometimes she says things that seem to suggest that that's what she's saying.
Yes. Yeah.
We just let them be children of the forest. And
the Greeks had a word for formation, paideia. Right. And paideia there was nothing free about it. There was a curriculum and there was a way of doing that curriculum. And actually, in order to gain the freedom of thinking and the freedom of thought, you had to first sit at the table of paideia, let paideia do that good work to you. And then after you've graduated from that school, from that formation, then you can engage in free thinking. But it first requires submission. It does not require freedom. You only acquire the freedom after you've submitted.
Yeah, well, and that's so much of her writing. It seems disintegrated. To say that the child should all this freedom and license we're giving the child, which contradicts paideia, which contradicts this idea that there is an ideal human nature which we are trying to get each student to approximate. That's limiting. That's unifying. Whereas she seems, I'm not totally sure she denies that. It's hard to tell because she's so focused on the disintegrative stuff.
And I think a large part of where she's coming from in this is a reaction to the highly strict classical model, which is not what we advocate,
like
right?
the UK boarding school sort of system.
Yeah, right. Where, okay, you got this question wrong, where you're going to go get 10 lashes or whatever. Like, that's not what we're proposing. And so there is a legitimacy to the reaction to that. And, context is important,
Mhm.
right? And so, this kind of rhetoric may have been somewhat appropriate at that day and age. Go, look, wait,
Let's loosen it
let's
up.
loosen it up
Right.
a little bit, but it doesn't need to be taken to the natural the natural conclusions that her words would arrive to.
Because we all disagree with the grad grind approach,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we do.
Yes. Yes.
But if you, and I do think you're right. I think she's responding to that grad grindian kind of education, the grinders in Dombey and Son in Dickens, which is just this soulless repetition. That, but that's you can't argue against that and think you've struck a blow against something like classical education, which does have some coherence and organization to it. I don't think she's not good at making fine distinctions.
Did you say the grad grinds are in Dombey and Son?
No, the grinders are
the
in Dombey.
grinders.
Yeah. The grinders were the people who taught the young child their Latin forms.
Oh, okay. I don't
And
even
it
remember
was
that.
completely sterile. They didn't really know these were not educated people.
Okay.
Tanya, before we move on to Mitchell's second question, you mentioned, what do you do about the child needing to run around the room?
Yeah, and I didn't answer.
And I wanted you to answer that. And I wanted you to
yes.
answer maybe how we think how Charlotte Mason would have answered and how classical would answer, maybe?
Well, I mean, I don't know how Charlotte Mason would have answered it. I can guess that it would have been, that child needs to be free to learn in the way that they need to learn. But my answer would be what I heard our teacher answer, the other teacher who asked, is that for that child who does struggle to sit still and the classroom is difficult and a desk is difficult for, that she would have that child very close to her and that she would allow a little more movement from the child, where we are constantly telling them sit up, feet on the floor, hands in front of you, good posture, that when she did that child then, is like bouncing on the chair or moving around and she would just let that go. And then sometimes even if it's a child that needed some kind of activity, just something to fidget with, like a pencil grip or something, just something that would keep them in their chair. So it is
Some accommodation maybe made.
some accommodation, so that the big thing is that child not be allowed to be a distraction to the rest of the class.
But they're still actively working towards forming that child to the
Absolutely.
ideal of you can sit there calmly and quietly and pay attention.
Yeah, but
Yes.
it does that, and that has to be done really throughout education, but it has to be done differently for young children. They cannot sit as long as older
That's
children.
right.
You do make accommodations to a child's nature.
Yes, I saw somebody teaching a little class of 1st through 3rd graders, and she had been teaching for about 20 minutes, and it was just getting a little louder than she wanted it to be. And she said, "Okay, everybody stop. I want you to stand up, push your chairs in, just stand there." And then she talked to them. She just kept moving with the lesson. And then she said, "Okay, everybody sit back down, pick your pencils up, and we're ready to write." But whatever she was working on that she could do orally, she just let them stand for a minute. So it didn't take anything away from her class time, but it was an acknowledgement that they did need a little bit of movement.
To movement, right,
Yes.
right.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, in all of your life, that you're not going to have the freedom to do whatever you want. And
Right.
like all of life is not going to fit you into whatever mode that you want it to be. And most of your employed life, which most of us will be employed, hopefully gainfully, for most of you'll be doing exactly what is expected and required of you. And we start that training, which is a training in virtue, with young students.
Right.
Right.
That's right.
Of course we make certain accommodations and we sort of help them, but we're still trying to fit them to a mold, not allowing them to determine what the mold is.
Yes.
And so does
Right.
does she disagree with that, you think?
Yeah, I do, because
Completely?
Yes. Well, I think she has a moral ideal
Mhm.
that because she's writing in the early turn of the century. Okay. So she has a moral ideal that I bet she was probably really good at cultivating morals and good habits in the life of her students. She probably was a very good teacher in that regard.
Mhm.
And so, and perhaps they, enough of her students sort of shared that moral framework that she didn't have to think sort of beyond that. We're not in that context anymore.
Right. Exactly.
And so, I think that like the approach to, and her very idea of being like what a kid is and how a kid is trained, problematizes or makes difficult the assertion that we should train kids to a thing instead of letting the kids sort of train themselves.
Mm-hmm.
A big motivation here is actually letting the kid be the driver.
So are we at who teaches the child?
Sure.
Have we moved on?
Well, but I think a good segue here is that if you listen to the rhetoric, it's like, why have a teacher at all?
That's the third question.
If it's just free range, then why do you have a teacher at all?
Yeah.
So she clearly believes in teachers.
You should have a teacher.
She's one herself.
Yeah. And I mean, but Mitchell, you're making this point that the child, that you need to bring the child into the real world or something along those lines.
Yes.
I mean, she says that in point 6. I mean, she says, she's talking about the education as an atmosphere, and she says it stultifies a child to bring down his world to the child's level. And she's talking about that the environment, they should take into account the educational value of his natural home atmosphere, both regards persons and things, and let him live freely among his proper conditions. Okay, the freely part is getting me a little bit there. But I think her point, and this is something I've mentioned on this podcast multiple times, is like, my mother was aware of the educational nature of everything in the house.
Sure.
And to the point where she did not allow certain things in the house because it was just going to be a time waster, as opposed to something that, even if it were a game, was it a game that practiced mathematics or practiced linguistics or something along those lines, then that's fine. But if not, we're not gonna allow that in the house. And so, I mean, I think there are hints of that in here, but I think the idea of the whole rhetoric of the whole thing makes that kind of fade away.
But the thing, what she's saying here, like, when I was reading the longer introduction, she actually doesn't make that point. She says that, parents are going to be inclined to sort of not let their kids hear you argue in the house. And so some parents are like, well, you shouldn't argue in front of your children. You should do that in private. But no, like, part of education is the very atmosphere they're in. So let's just fill their atmosphere with everything that's really like with all the things, because they're full persons, right? They're able to parse out what's good and bad in their atmosphere. They're able to sort of integrate that and ask good questions about it. So don't make a what does she call it? Like a fake or an artificial environment. And that's what your mom did. She made I'd call it good parenting.
Oh, she was making an artificial environment.
Yeah, she made an artificial environment instead of filling it with like all true and all the normal things that a kid would experience just normally if you just sort of let them free in the atmosphere. Your mom actually cultivated an environment.
I want you to be formed by having true and good and beautiful things.
Yes, exactly.
And we do the same thing with books.
Yeah.
We don't, we control what books are on our bookshelves.
When we recognize there's a difference between the order of knowing and the order of understanding. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, I want my child to be able to know everything. But there are things about a married life that my little 3-year-old doesn't need to know about.
That's right.
And because she hasn't received enough wisdom and insight into relationships and how those and how complicated they are to know that when mommy and daddy are fighting, not that I ever fight with my wife, mommy and dad are fighting. It's not an indication that they don't love each other, that they hate each other, that they're doing war, but they're just doing that messy business of trying to like live well together. She wouldn't see that. And so it's probably good that we don't argue in front of her, so that, because she doesn't know how else to read conflict other than like warfare, right?
Well, and we were talking about artificiality before, because she does seem to have this prejudice against artificiality. Mm-hmm. And yet any classroom situation, which she's clearly involved in because she's a teacher, is artificial. I mean, it's like, the romanticists want to say, well, artificiality is bad, but civilization is an artifice. It's completely artificial.
Right.
It's been constructed.
Well, it's an artifact in the classic sense.
Yeah,
right?
it's been constructed, but it's been constructed toward a metaphysical form. Right.
And also, like, we have to be in a classroom because otherwise the children are too distracted. Right? Have you ever, tried to teach a classroom of kids outside?
Outside,
Oh.
yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, it's
Yes.
awful.
Mhm.
It is awful.
Yeah, you have to have a certain level of artificiality to get anything done at all,
Hmm.
right? And so I again, she's not clear herself on this. It doesn't seem to me, because she's apparently supportive of having a classroom, which is artificial, and yet she kind of talks against artifice. So I think she's
It is
self-contradictory
two
in
sides out of the mouth. I noticed that repeatedly. Like, all we can do and educate is control the environment.
Mhm.
But wait a minute, I thought kids were supposed to be the ones guiding their own education. They're
Right.
supposed to be sort of free.
Right.
But now we're supposed to actually now control
Right.
those things. So
Which-
which part, like when does the parent get into the teacher? Like,
Right.
is the parent, and that's the second question that I think maybe we would sort of disagree with, is who is actually doing the teaching? And I think for Charlotte Mason, it seems to be, she seems to sort of decidedly say that the child is the one teaching.
But her practice belies her principles in so many ways.
Yes.
all throughout
yes.
her writing.
Yeah, she literally started school, taught at a school.
Yeah, right. And you can see, but you can see, because of that principle, why she's so popular among homeschoolers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to the extent that she like encourages homeschooling families to sort of go off and do that thing themselves, that's great. I hope that they are encouraged by that.
Mhm.
But she also, explicitly says, like on point 10 here, like you shouldn't have lesson plans.
Mhm.
You should actually just open up good books and put them in front of your kids and let them ask good questions.
It's not just the child that needs to be liberated; it's the curriculum it's the subjects that need to be liberated from a curriculum, right?
Well, right.
Yes, maybe, yeah.
But I mean, she talks about how much knowledge a child needs, but then she seems to be against a child being bored. And I don't think I have a problem with students being bored.
Right, right. Well,
I
that
mean,
goes
you've
back to
got
Somebody
to
said
do-
boredom is hostility without enthusiasm. So it's really it's not really, boredom is usually not about a problem with anything in particular that they're bored with. It's just their own attitude.
right.
And
Right. Well, and I mean, there are certain subjects that students love more than others, and that's okay.
Maybe it's actually good for, maybe part of their education is actually
that's part of formation.
right. Exactly. Guess what? Like most of your life is going to be boring, and
Right.
in either you change your attitude and like look for the silver lining to every boring situation, such that every time you talk to someone, you're never once. Why are you bored with a single person? Every person is if we truly believe Charlotte Mason is a true person, then no person or subject should be boring.
I'm going back to Farmer Boy. I don't know why I've got this Farmer Boy theme running through my mind today, but it's the same thing with Almanzo. He doesn't want to go to school. He's bored in school. He wants to be a farmer. He wants to be on the farm all the time. And his dad just keeps sending him back to school, saying he can't be a good farmer without knowing arithmetic, without knowing how to read, how to write. And so he is bored at school, but there is a purpose in that will lead him to be able to do what he wants to do, and children can't make those decisions for themselves.
Right.
But they can't see, partly because in order to not be bored, you have to see you have to see the tangible purpose in something, right? And a child can't do that yet. They're not in a position to
That's
be able to
right.
do that.
That's
So
right.
that's where the adult has to step in, knowing what the best thing for the child is, and knowing that when he does know how to do arithmetic and does know how to read, he will see the value in it then, but he can't see it now, and you need to protect them from their own ignorance.
Right.
Well, and that's why we try to have a very clear curriculum, plan of studies.
Right.
Like, if you do this year by year, by the end of high school, you will have accomplished X, Y, or Z. If you don't have that, then you can get to 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grades and go, I'm nowhere near going to be able to accomplish what as a high schooler I should have accomplished because I wasn't following some given plan.
I do agree with some of the things that she talks about as far as curriculum. She is a fan of elevated language, and
Yeah.
we are too. She is a fan of narration, and we are too. This point number 15, a single reading, no repeated reading ever. This is probably the point I disagree with more than anything in here, is this, that if if children think there's going to be a rereading, they won't pay attention.
Right.
I mean, that just doesn't even make sense.
I guess the third question, the second question was who does the teaching? And she says we say the teacher. Charlotte Mason tends to say the student actually does the teaching to themselves. And the third
I'm sorry, before you go into third, can I just make a clarification there of like active and passive learning, and that like the student, who's doing the teaching, the teacher's doing it. Who's doing the learning, the student is. And I think that needs to be very clear is like, I think what she's pushing back on is this idea that the child's just sitting there receptive and doing nothing, and we're just shooting this information at them. No, like you have to engage that child.
Sure.
I think that's what the reaction is to this idea that you don't have to engage the child. You just have to get up there and talk. And I've seen teachers, you've seen teachers that will just get up there and talk, have no idea what's going on in the classroom, what's going on in those kids' heads. But a good teacher is understanding what's going on there and adjusting how they're presenting stuff in order to get those light bulbs go off.
That is an instinct that teachers have. Just to be able to know what's going on there. I like to call it a dance. You are literally, if you are a master teacher, you are dancing in your classroom with your students, with your curriculum, and it's all just beautiful together. Let's stop right here because we've still all got a lot to say, I think, about this, and it's an important subject. So let's turn this into a 2-part podcast so people don't have to listen to us for 2 hours. And come back and finish this conversation wearing the same clothes because we're going to do it today, right? Okay. But if you do have questions for us or comments that you'd like to make, we have tried not to interrupt Mitchell too much today. So hopefully there will be no criticism on that front.
But that's the main.
But if you would like to, just like to tell us that Mitchell has talked too much today, we would love to hear that too.
We certainly.
And we have an email address now called podcast@memoriapress.com. Is that right?
That is correct.
podcast@memoriapress.com. We would love to hear from you. Until next time.
Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.